Thanks everyone for joining. We'll get started in maybe like 2 minutes. People are still coming in. Okay, I guess we can start. We can get started. Thank you all for joining us today. Welcome back, everyone. So many of you have been with us through many of our other webinars, and if it's your first session with us, welcome. This is our final webinar in this series around supporting small but mighty practices in screening for and addressing ACEs in California. This one is all around intimate partner violence, which is an all too common trauma. Next slide. So just as a reminder, and you're going to have access to the PowerPoints as well as the recording. You can, if you missed any of the past webinars and they're of interest to you, feel free to check them out. Next slide. And just a little bit about us, just very quickly. My name is Yael Lipton. I work for Primary Care Development Corporation, which is a national nonprofit based in New York City, but with offices in California, DC. And our mission is really to improve primary care. And through the ACEs Aware project that's going on in California, we are participating by really focusing on small practices. I am a master trainer at Primary Care Development Corporation, and I spent most of my career providing direct services in underserved communities in New York City, as well as training professionals both in healthcare and social service organizations around a variety of different topics, including the one that we're talking about today. So that's a little bit about me. Angela?
Angie's right. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And as Yael said, welcome and welcome back. My name's Angela Fernandez. You can certainly call me Angie. And I am currently the Assistant Director for the Mount Sinai Sexual Assault and Violence Intervention Program, which is based here in New York City. And we're a not-for-profit that specifically works with survivors of sexual violence and intimate partner violence. I've been at Savvy for, well, longer than I'd like to actually say at this point. But so the focus for the last, 12 or 13 years has specifically been around trauma work, specifically in sexual and intimate partner violence. I started my career as a sexuality educator at Planned Parenthood of New York City, and have really spent my whole career focused on women's health issues and public health issues. And that's really what got me here today. So nice to see you.
Great, thank you. Next slide. So we're going to just talk a little bit about intimate partner violence and trauma in general. We're going to talk a little bit about it in the time of COVID, or we're not going to spend a ton of time doing that. We're going to talk about the health effects of intimate partner violence. We're going to talk about how healthcare can and should respond to survivors, both in person and through telehealth. And we're going to talk about how to respond to disclosures, how to screen for intimate partner violence. And we're also going to talk about the laws and requirements in California around reporting and other things. So we have a lot to cover, and we'll hopefully get through this in about an hour and a half. Okay, next slide. So intimate partner violence in the US, as you can see, and you probably already know, it's incredibly common, unfortunately. Victims really can be people of all genders, but we do see it more commonly in women. The next bunch of slides are going to be all around statistics about different populations, really because we wanted to highlight that while some populations experience a little bit more intimate partner violence than others, it's really a common occurrence in all populations. So you can see that more than a third of women and more than a quarter of men have experienced rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime. And about a quarter and 14% of men, a quarter of women and 14% of men have experienced severe physical violence by an intimate partner. And abuse by a partner is the #1 cause of injury for women in the 15 to 44 age group. Okay, so again, some of the slides I won't read every bullet point, but again, you will have them later and just want to get through this piece. Okay, next slide. So what's happening in California? So 35% of California women and 31% of men experience intimate partner violence in their lifetimes. In 2018, domestic violence homicides comprised almost 11% of all California homicides. That's a lot. And, you know, there's really, the last bullet is really about this tie around weapons. And when there was a study done at 67 domestic violence shelters, found that abusive intimate partners use handguns to harm, threaten, or scare a third of those study participants. So, you know, the connection between violence and owning a firearm or a weapon is really real as well. Okay, next slide. Young people between the ages of 16 and 24 experience the highest rates of rape and sexual assault in the US. So, you know, again, it starting young. About 1 in 10 high school students has reported being hit, slapped, or hurt on purpose by an intimate partner. And 15.5 million US children live in families in which intimate partner violence occurred at least once in the past year. Okay. The last bullet is about youth and also people in LGBTQ relationships. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Next slide. Okay, we also thought just because, you know, we focus a lot on ACEs in this project, that it was important to just note that even children who are not, let's say, directly abused by a family or a care, or, you know, where they live, a quarter of children have witnessed violence in the past year in their family or in their community. Almost 10% had witnessed a parent assault another parent in the past year. And the lifetime rate of witnessing any family assault among the oldest youth was 32%. This information all comes from the National Survey of Children's Exposure to Violence, which I'm not sure how often it's done. It's not every year. It's done periodically. So if you're interested, you can get more information from that study. Okay, next slide. So as again, intimate partner violence is really common in gay and lesbian people as well, and bisexual people. We'll see later how this abuse can be similar and also how it can be different than what we see in heterosexual couples. But as you can see, almost half of lesbians and over half of bisexual women experience rape, physical violence, or stalking. And a quarter of gay men and over a third of bisexual men experience rape, physical violence, or stalking. Almost a half of bisexual women have been raped. 22% have been raped by an intimate partner. And 40% of gay men and 47% of bisexual men have experienced sexual violence other than rape. So really common in this population as well. Next slide. So what about transgender people? We purposely made a separate slide about them. These are really, while these are the best statistics we can really find on transgender people, it's important to note that the research is probably not completely accurate. because of the way gender information is collected or not collected by law enforcement and even in helping organizations. So these numbers are really probably underestimates, and you can see that they're pretty high. Okay, and while it's not all intimate partner violence, it's certainly also, transgender people have the unfortunate experience of living with the threat of violence in almost all aspects of their life. Okay, next slide. Okay, a couple of things to point out here around American Indians, Native Americans, Alaskan Natives, and Indigenous people, that in one CDC study in 2008, almost 40% of Native women identified as victims of intimate partner violence at least some point in their life. What we do want to say here is that when Native American and Alaskan Native women were assaulted, it was often more violent, and it needed those assaults needed medical care more often than when other US women are assaulted. Additionally, Native populations are 2.5 times more likely to be raped or sexually assaulted than women in the US in general, and that white perpetrators make a larger percentage of those committing that violence. So, and even within this group, the violence is less likely to be reported because it is believed that nothing will be done. So this data really speak to not only violence against women, but racist violence against Indigenous people in the US, with a lot of white men committing those crimes. Next slide. Okay, the main point here is that when women are killed, unfortunately, it's usually by a current or a past intimate partner. So again, some of this data is probably low, and we suspect it's even more than half, or closer to 3/4 probably of female homicide victims are killed by a current or past romantic partner. So one thing we always talk about, Angie and I, is that, when we watch the local news and, there's a report of a woman being found murdered, inevitably what follows, if not during that newscast, or if not the next day, is something like, the police are looking for the estranged boyfriend or the ex-husband or even the current boyfriend or husband. And unfortunately, these murders are relatively simple to solve, because they often involve, a person that is, incredibly, close to, or has been close to that woman in the past. Okay, next slide. So while we're not devoting this entire webinar to IPV in the time of COVID, we definitely wanted to mention it because it has gotten a lot of press and attention. We do know that COVID-19 has really become an opportunistic condition of IPV here and abroad. Why is this the case? So really, in short, it's because stay-at-home orders really have the potential to increase the power and control that abusers hold over their victims, and ignite or exacerbate violence in romantic relationships. Okay. Next slide. Oh, and I guess we didn't say in the very beginning, so I just wanted to take a second now. Feel free to chat in questions or comments to the chat box while I'm speaking. Angie's going to be monitoring, or interrupt me if there's something we need to address. But when you do that, just make sure that you chat it out to all panelists and attendees so that we can all benefit from hearing from everyone. Okay, so let's look quickly at IPV overall. For some of you, this may be a review, and for others, this may be new. Please know again that we're not spending the majority of our time on what IPV is, but going to summarize as best as we can. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we often use the terms domestic violence, which is fine. We purposely use intimate partner violence because domestic violence is often defined specifically as violence between two people who are married or who live together. It also is sometimes defined by law enforcement, and it can actually include relationships like people who are caretakers, people in foster care, and adoption. On the other hand, intimate partner violence is about any romantic partners, whether or not you live together, whether or not you're legally married, or really whatever, however you define, your relationship. So it's more broad, which is why it is what we use. Next slide. Okay, so many of you have seen the power and control wheel. And it is kind of old, but it's still a go-to for everybody because it's still very accurate. It's really helpful in understanding the tactics that abusers can use to gain power and control over their victims. And while many tactics cross over from one abuser to another or from one relationship to another, much of intimate partner violence is really individual. And what we mean by that is that some of these tactics may be used and some may not be used. However, the abuser really very carefully calculates which tactics to use, right, that are going to have the biggest impact or biggest effect on controlling, their victim. So we see things like using intimidation, using emotional abuse, using children, right, threatening around children, minimizing, denying, blaming, and all different things like that. Okay, next slide. We did want to mention, that some of the tactics are the same for people in LGBTQ relationships, there are some differences that are really worth noting. And I'm sorry if this is hard for you to see, but I'll give you some concrete examples because I think it's important to point out. So thinking about isolation and outing, when people particularly are first coming out, they're very vulnerable to abuse, right? They may be losing friends or family, or they may be alienated from their community, their culture, perhaps a religious institution. And this isolation is obviously a result of homophobia, and it can be really useful to an abuser who's trying to further isolate their partner by threatening to out them, which, again, could cost them family, could cost them job, and could cost them friend and support as well. Additionally, using children. So in many states, LGBTQ people are not allowed to be the legal parent of their children, even in states where their parental rights are protected. Not all of them have access to the systems to assert their legal rights. So for a non-biological parent, the threat of having no contact with their children can make leaving an abusive relationship really more complex and almost impossible. And sometimes abusers use a small LGBT community to their advantage, as it may be easier to keep track of their victim because there may be few social spaces open to them. And a victim may stay longer because if they leave, that may also mean leaving that small community, those few supportive people and institutions which they need. Additionally, let's see, and obviously there's a history of law enforcement historically having used violence against people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. So, they can be very fearful of going to police and law enforcement. And so again, that may be another way that makes it harder for them to leave or to report, and the abuser can maintain power and control. Okay, next slide. Last one, I promise, last wheel. We really like this. This is a new wheel since the pandemic is new, power and control in a pandemic. So in a pandemic, people may be home together more, things may be more stressful. So abusers can use this to even further isolate the victim by telling them things like they really can't go anywhere. If you do go anywhere, you're exposing us, you're exposing yourself, you're exposing me, you're exposing the children, whoever, lives there. And, you're going to be in trouble if one of us gets sick. And there'll be consequences. They can also intervene in things like work from home, and by doing things like turning off Wi-Fi, constantly interrupting. If a victim is an essential worker, the abuser may make the person stay at home, again, which has the potential to make the victim more financially dependent. But I think it's also really good to note that while we hear a lot on the news that, oh, domestic violence is out of control during the pandemic, a lot of the research that we see doesn't necessarily back that up. There is, at least in New York City, there has been less reporting of these types of crimes, and we could certainly have a long discussion about why it is. Maybe it's going down, or maybe, you know, someone's always with their abuser and therefore they actually can't report. And I think, you know, one of the things that I know Angie has talked about is, however, is that when people do have been going to the hospital, the emergency room, the injuries have been more severe because they really don't want to go unless like it's absolutely necessary. Obviously, hopefully things will start changing a little bit as more and more people get vaccinated. Okay, next slide. So just want to review the definition here of IPV. And the main thing to understand is that it's really a pattern of tactics that are either violent or coercive used by one partner, right, to maintain power and control over the other partner. Just because it's called domestic violence in IPV does not mean that there has to be actual violence to be considered intimate partner violence. Oftentimes there will be, or there eventually will be violence, but sometimes the coercion and the psychological tactics can be so powerful that violence isn't even needed. And important to note that, again, all economic, racial, and ethnic groups experience this, as I think we covered. Okay, next slide. So here are some common examples of tactics used in each main category. But again, remember, it doesn't have to be these things. So the physical, you know, we all, I think, have a good sense of that. There's sexual, right? Reproductive coercion. We see this a lot with younger women who have been, their birth control has been sabotaged, or they're forced to use birth control when they don't want to, things like that. Emotional, obviously, financial, really, and this is really, again, during the pandemic, we can see more of this, fostering financial dependency, right? And fraud, employment threats. And then the psychological, the intimidation, the manipulation, the isolation, threats, a lot of online harassment as well, and stalking. Okay, thank you. Next slide. Okay, we're gonna watch just a quick video, and Kimmy's just going in and out to get it started for us. So this is a little hard to watch, and it's hard to fully explain how a relationship goes from, you know, being really, really nice to being violent. But I think this does kind of a good job in like a minute and a half or 2 minutes. So we're gonna go watch it, and then we'll look at.
You ready?
Yep.
And for the rest of my life, I don't want to be with anyone but you.
What are you doing?
Until death do you part.
I do. Well, maybe I wouldn't have to worry about other guys looking at you if you didn't dress like a whore.
I just don't know what I would do if you were with anyone but me.
Where you been?
Hey, you look at me when I'm talking to you. Do you hear me?
I didn't want to do that. You just don't listen.
Who's that?
Hey! You sure you're okay? I'm fine.
Who's gonna take you in but me? You will never see your son again. How about next time? I make sure you never leave the house again. Guess it's my lucky damn day. Look what I found under the bathroom sink.
Tony, wait, just no, hold on!
YWCA hotline. How can I help you?
Every day, 24,000 women are abused by
You
someone
can
they
go
love.
ahead and stop it, Kimmy.
Just one phone call can help put.
Thank you for that. So I know there's a lot of us, but does anyone want to react to that quick video? How it made you feel? what it makes you think of. Harsh, yep, absolutely. Uncomfortable, scared, yeah.
Put a stop to it.
Cool. Afraid, intimidated, helpless. Blinking away tears, yeah. Triggered, very much helpless. Reality for many we probably aren't aware of. Yep. Someone wrote, makes me want to be able to ask more questions of all my patients in the office. We're going to spend the majority of our time today talking about how to do that. Made me think back on my childhood. Yeah, sorry to hear that. So glad to be out of it. I was there. We need better screening and not worry about the time used. Oh, definitely. Could we discuss warning signs? Yeah, we're going to discuss some of that stuff. Yeah, these are all, thank you all for chatting in. Definitely. Angie, is there anything you want to say about the video in summary or?
I think everyone here has articulated it perfectly. We chose this because, you know, it is hard to watch. It's also, I thought that it was really well done by, you know, an organization that provides services to survivors. And we often don't have an opportunity to really think about how, you know, that a lot of times it's a gradual progression in the escalation of violence and in more of those red flags for survivors who were in it. And so it's, yeah, so you know, it's hard to watch, but we felt like it was important to acknowledge, you know, what that reality really is. Thanks, yeah.
Sure. And so I was getting some feedback. So when you're chatting, if you're okay with using all panelists and attendees, that way everyone can see, because some of you were just chatting to me and Angie, which is fine, but I realized I was kind of rattling them off quickly, assuming everyone was seeing them. So if you don't mind, just choose that. And yeah, that clip is available on YouTube. And so we can certainly send you that link. All right, we're going to transition a little bit to the effects of intimate partner violence. And unfortunately, it affects both physical and mental health, and not only right from the acute injuries that someone may suffer. And so many of these health problems are similar. As someone who experiences other forms of trauma, there are some things that are unique to intimate partner violence. Next slide. So, you know, again, nope. Yeah, okay. So things like impaired brain function, problems with the endocrine system, immune response, DNA can really be affected. So I'm not a scientist, so it took me a while to understand this, what's written on the slide. But basically, the way I can summarize it is that exposure to intimate partner violence, along with other trauma, actually changes DNA and how the brain works. And so what happens is that aging may happen faster, which means that all of the organs and systems in our bodies really begin to break down earlier than they should, you know, based on age. So someone who even has left an abuser years before, they often physiologically look like a person that's actually a decade older, right? Because the trauma and the violence really becomes part of the body and the brain. Okay, next slide.
Did you want me to, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, it's okay.
So in intimate partner violence, this is not new, but what I think is being recognized more now than ever, and very much connected to some of the other effects involving traumatic brain injuries, is strangulation. And that what is, you know, we could do an entire webinar just on this, but we wanted to include this in here because oftentimes people who experience strangulation don't actually have the language to say strangulation. Many survivors will say choke. or maybe their partner just put their hands on their neck. But strangulation, and we're going to talk more about this later, is a huge indicator for increased risk for injury and for fatalities. And so this is any time that oxygen is cut off, oxygen flow, and it only takes about 5 seconds for someone to lose consciousness. And it obviously has very short-term, impact. So many times survivors, if they've lost consciousness, that may be a sign that they need to get health care in more of an emergency setting. But what's really important about this for health centers and for primary care providers is that we're understanding now that there are long-term cognitive effects that very much mimic traumatic brain injuries, like a bang or a blunt force object hitting the head. And it may be due more to strangulation than anything else. And most of the research in the past that's been done on traumatic brain injuries has been really around professional athletes, war veterans, and there has not been a lot of research specifically done on women, and specifically women that have a history of intimate partner violence. So these are some great resources, and we put these visuals here. They're easy to find. But I expect that we'll be starting to see more and more discussion around this, and a consideration as far as connection to other services like radiology, like neurology, orthopedics, and all that kind of stuff. So,
yeah, thank you. Okay, next slide. So women who experience IPV are 80% more likely to have a stroke, 70% more likely to have heart disease, 60% more likely to have asthma, 70% more likely to drink heavily than women who have not experienced IPV. And obviously, just like when we talk about the strong connection between trauma and substance use disorder, it's the same here in that the substance use is the coping mechanism, right? And so we have, I would argue as an entire system, we have always been focusing on the substance use piece of it, and kind of wondering why people aren't able to, get clean, so to speak, or stop, using drugs and alcohol in a way that is unhealthy, when really it's the underlying trauma that needs to be addressed, right? Because the drinking and the drugs are really the coping mechanism, which for many people work well. Someone is writing, and I think it's probably a good thing to share. Thank you for sharing with everyone. I had a classmate who had cancer due to domestic violence. She's a double survivor of cancer and a violent childhood. Yeah. So unfortunately, those types of stories are really common, and that's awful. Okay, next slide. So the big question, right? The question that many of us get from our, less understanding friends and family when we talk about this is, why do they stay? I don't mean to make a joke of it, but I'm sure many of you know where I'm coming from. So there's many different reasons. These are some of the really big ones. I mean, safety, right? Fear of injury and death. Unfortunately, leaving is the most dangerous time. So, forcing, or not forcing someone, but encouraging someone to leave before they have a plan that accounts for how they're going to stay safe is actually a really dangerous thing, to do. And the survivor really knows when is the best time and when they're really ready. Emotional, right? They're, somehow they're to blame for this behavior. There was love there once, they remember it, and they still love that person. Fear of the unknown. There's that expression, the devil you know is better than the devil that you don't know. Immigration, certainly concerns about being deported or police. Cultural, right? So beliefs that the most important thing is to keep the family together. Having, two parents perhaps is, better for everyone than just having one parent, even within this unhealthy circumstance. Financial is a huge one, right? How are you going to live and pay for things? systemic failures, right? There's just not enough. There's not enough shelters. There's not enough services. And again, depending on where you live, you know, that can really, really be amplified. You know, if you're in a big city, you're going to probably have more services available to you. But if you're in a rural place, you know, you may have nothing. Child custody concerns, right? Intimidated by the criminal justice system, who could blame anyone for that? We're all intimidated by it, right? Going into that, being unsure what's going to happen, not necessarily trusting people to believe you or to help you. And really the alternative doesn't seem possible or feels more unsafe. Yeah. So again, those are some of the common ones, but there are definitely others as well. Next slide. Okay, so I'm just going to read a quick story. This is a true story, and then we'll, you know, it's just a really good, it's a good example of how this stuff stays with people. So Sarah was sure she had left her violent past behind. Her first husband, a high-powered business executive, who during their 10-year marriage had pounded her head against walls, sexually assaulted her, and nearly strangled her with a dog leash, was out of her life. She'd gotten a divorce, finished college, become a successful consultant, worked intensively with a trauma therapist, and married an old friend with whom she felt safe. Gradually, the symptoms of her previous torment eased. The residual headaches from the head injuries disappeared, although she still remembers the sound of her skull hitting the kitchen walls and floors. There are still black holes in her memory. She can't coherently recollect the years from her mid to late 20s, the period when her violence reached its height. But the worst of the terrors are over. I no longer suffer from PTSD at night, she says, remembering how she would sleep in her horse's stall to hide from her then husband's drunken attacks. Now remarried, I no longer have a hyper startled response if my husband walks into the room behind me. Next slide. In her mid-30s and wanting to start life anew, she was ready to be a mother. But for reasons her doctor initially didn't understand, Sarah struggled to carry a baby to term. After 6 marriages, miscarriages, not marriages, sorry, a doctor finally suggested that head trauma could be a factor. Neurological damage from repeated brain injuries had disrupted the hormonal balance she needed to deliver a healthy child. My endocrine system just hardwired the violence into me. After all the work I've done in the past 14 years, getting away from the men who were abusing me, she was also abused as a child, and getting my mind in a good place, I really thought I was there. But there's a whole other layer of this legacy. And it wasn't until I was safe that those symptoms started to emerge. So, you know, feel free to chat in reactions. And, you know, when we're, at least through this project, we've really been focusing on trauma that happens as children. And, you know, this did not happen to her as a child, but it's important to note, clearly she did have trauma as a child as well. You know, the effects years later, even when it happens as an adult, are really still there and still cause a problem. Someone's asking about Find the Story. It's from a magazine. If you, Gregory, if you want to, if you send me your email, I can probably find it and send it to you. It's from a magazine called More, which no longer exists, but I bet we can find it online. Any other reactions? Sad for her, yeah. Yeah, okay. All right, next slide. Okay, you're up, Ange.
Thank you, Yael. And thank you everyone for your comments and for sharing your own personal connections to this topic. We know that it's, you know, it's the reason why we definitely wanted to cover this, because as you're seeing even here among us, which is a, you know, kind of a small group of people, comparably speaking to the rest of the population, that many of us have some experience with this, unfortunately. So, so we're going to now move on. Yael did an amazing job really setting the foundation of understanding what is happening for survivors of intimate partner violence and just those power and control dynamics. And now we're going to move on to the part that actually, hopefully, many of us will feel good about, because there are things that we can do in healthcare. Specifically can play a very, very important role. Some people shared earlier saying, I wish, this makes me want to go back and have more conversations with my patients. Or, it's so important to do these screenings, even if it takes up more time. And so that's really what we're focused on for the rest of this training. Next slide, Kimmy. So why screen? I think most of you are already talking about why we would screen, but we really wanted to put these questions out to you, also just to hear from the rest of you. And if you wouldn't mind, please, I know it's hard, but when you're writing in comments, to definitely make sure you're sharing with panelists and attendees so that more people can see what you're sharing. So we'd love to hear if you're willing to share this, but can you think of a time when a patient's presenting health symptoms made you suspect intimate partner violence, but you hesitated to ask? If you want to share some comments or yes, I think because we second guess our gut, someone said, absolutely. Yes, so that might be one of the reasons, right? When, we suspect something, we're not exactly sure. Do we bring it up? Maybe might be worried that we will offend someone. We don't want to be wrong. Anyone else been in a situation like that where you suspected something was going on for this person at home, but didn't know how to bring it up? Yeah. And how about this one? When was the last time you all were screened by a healthcare provider for your own healthcare needs? Anyone? Never, never. Yes, you're right. Oftentimes abusers may be attending those appointments with your patients. And so that may be a hesitation to ask as well. I'm seeing a lot of nevers. Oh my goodness. I feel like I'm too young at 19 to be asked. Only while pregnant. Okay. So most of you are writing in what we suspected would be the response, because unfortunately, screening still really is not part of just standard practice for a whole host of reasons. This is not to be shaming of healthcare, right? We all know that we're juggling a million things, but I think it also shows that there is a lot of room for us to grow, and that we can actually do something about this. So, in a way, maybe that's a good thing that people haven't been screened yet, which means that there's a lot of room that we can, we're not where we could be. And so we have a lot of options. There's a comment there. Violence has a human history where some family units witness intergenerational violence and ill treatment. Absolutely. This cycle can only be treated by family household whom he has a strong voice in stopping the violence. I have a friend that was slapped and had her lip busted by her drunken boyfriend. And when her brother found her with a busted lip, he confronted by and told him to pick on someone with his own physical strength. Or if he finds his sister again, he would kick his ass and even threaten to kill him. And the couple went on, fixed their relationship, and lived on to marry and enjoy life for 30 years. So yeah.
Just sorry, quickly, I just wanted to respond to someone who wrote only when they were pregnant. And I just want to, that's not good that it only happened when you were pregnant. But sometimes that is when women are asked, because depending on the state you live in, it's part of like standard prenatal care. And the reason for that is that oftentimes in a violent relationship, violence and abuse escalates during pregnancy for a variety of reasons. One, it's a good way to, you know, keep control by threatening the pregnancy. Also because often the pregnant, you know, the mom, you know, is not as focused perhaps on the partner and the partner's needs, and that can escalate things. Just wanted to add that.
Absolutely. So thank you for chiming in. And, you know, certainly, yes, it's an extremely common and very dangerous time. Absolutely. It's the loss of power and control, right? Something else is taking over and is the priority. And so there's a lot of theories on why that would trigger more violence. Okay, next slide, please, Kimmy. So kind of, I think what you all said, here are some stats that we do know, that only about 15% of women with a history of IPV had any reference to violence in their medical records. And 10% of primary care providers routinely screen for IPV during new patient visits, and 9% screen routinely during periodic checkups. Specialist IPV agencies receive few referrals from healthcare. I will say, just in our very, you know, one program in New York City, I've definitely seen a shift in the last maybe couple of years of we're receiving a lot more referrals from within our own hospital system. And our program has been in existence since 1984. And so it's taken about that long to kind of, you know, get the word out. So we've definitely been seeing that, and, you know, maybe that's a good sign. Often when disclosures happen in primary care, response is inappropriate. And it kind of goes back to what we've been saying here. You know, oftentimes we hear from providers and residents and even medical students who are starting their medical training that they feel ill-equipped. They're not exactly sure how to respond, and they haven't had a lot of practice. They may be given a script, you know, their first year of medical school, you know, practice on a standardized patient, but when it came to real life experiences, they didn't have a lot of practice. And doctors and nurses are generally unaware of appropriate interventions and have rarely received training. And that we've seen during COVID, providers who were screening are doing less of it. And a lot of that goes to more telehealth visits and less time, and honestly having to triage the needs of patients. And sometimes, you know, even IPV screening is not going to seem as important as maybe some of the other issues that patients are dealing with, and that is the reality, right? Next slide, please. So we already listed some of these things, but what we do know and what has been listed, that the barriers for screening, and it was stated in the chat earlier too, the time is an issue. Don't know what to do if the screening is positive, may feel a little frustrated. There's no real solution. In a way, might not want to know because of all of the other requirements that may come up for that, especially for providers who are working in states where mandated reporting may be an issue with that too. Many practices don't receive compensation for screening for IPV. You know, and then we also have our own inherent biases, and even providers, you know, we all have our own personal experiences. Intimate partner violence is something that many of us really didn't learn about, except maybe through our own personal experiences and relationships. And so, you know, there may be some well-intentioned people that still really haven't figured out what their own biases are. So, and feeling a little frustrated of why their patient may continue to stay in a situation. And I think really a big one is the personal discomfort around this, right? That we're uncomfortable as a culture, as a society, talking about this stuff. Intimate partner violence has been something to keep in secret for as long as it's been happening, which is basically for as long as humans have been around. And there's a lot of shame and stigma attached, and really has always been considered more of a personal matter, right? That's something that's going on in someone's home, and other people don't get involved or butt in. And it's really hard to unlearn that as a society. Next slide, please. On the survivor or victim side of this, there are huge barriers to disclosing and considerations. And this is not an exhaustive list, right? Because humans are complex and we'll never be able to list every possible reason that is being considered in each person's experience. But a few of them, fear of not being taken seriously. Again, when survivors are in an abusive relationship, their whole sense of self and self-worth has been disintegrated. And so even having kind of the confidence of being able to interact with others is altered. And so it's a vulnerability. They've lost all power and control. And so to disclose something like this huge vulnerability, and it takes some trust. And it's really hard to expect that of somebody who has basically been in a situation where they've learned that somebody that they did trust has hurt them the most. So things like fear of retaliation as well, if this is shared with anyone else, the consequences of disclosing. So things, wondering, where does this information go? Is it going to be something that other people can find out about? Survivors are, they're aware that there are other systems at play. And so if it's someone who has children, the fear of their children being taken away from them or, losing custody is a huge, huge concern. Also, most survivors state that they want to be asked. They want to know that they're in an environment where they can talk about these things, but they're not necessarily going to disclose it without some sort of prompting. So if providers aren't asking, most people aren't going to be disclosing. There's a lot of fear and mistrust of police, especially among certain populations and communities, for good reason. And quite frankly, when we think about domestic violence, it has been the whole movement in domestic violence and kind of the battered women's movement has been inextricably intertwined with criminal justice. So it's always been an automatic connection to police. When you think about some of the more traditional ways that we consider safety planning, oftentimes calling the police, applying for an order of protection are like the first things we consider, right? So, so for many people, they may feel like, there are no other options except police or criminal justice, and that's not the route they want to take. And many survivors don't necessarily want their partner or ex-partner to be arrested or to be removed from the country or to get in trouble at all. Most people just want the abuse to stop. Next slide, please. So for LGBTQ survivors, and when we're considering more marginalized communities where there's already, reason to be untrusting of other systems and certainly communities that have already been oppressed in many other ways. This just exacerbates those already existing fears and experiences. So things like the fear that it may reflect poorly on their community is a very real thing. I also hear this a lot from our Black survivors of not wanting to reinforce some very damaging stereotypes that exist. So not disclosing is to protect the community. For LGBTQ survivors, especially fear of being outed, lack of culturally sensitive services. We don't have as many services that are specifically tailored for LGBTQ survivors. The isolation that exists. And, there's more likelihood that their interactions with police and other systems will be negative. Next slide, please. So when I think about screening, I always like to think about, sometimes it may seem overwhelming to start to think about screening and implementing screening. And people usually do get caught up a lot in, the tools and all of that other stuff. But I think it's really important to stop and think about, like, what is the purpose of screening in a healthcare setting? What would be the purpose? What are we trying to achieve with screening? Right? We talk a lot about screening, but we don't take a kind of a step back. What are we doing this for? And is it just about getting a disclosure? Most of the time we don't think, kind of beyond the disclosure. So really, I think the purpose of screening can be broken down into kind of 3 different ways of looking at it. The first one is the one where it's an opportunity to intervene in situations where there is active abuse and violence occurring with a patient, and they are in a high risk situation, and some more immediate interventions. Some immediate interventions are necessary and would be very helpful, right? So that's one reason for screening, and where they may not be interacting with other systems, but maybe healthcare is a place that they are connected. And this is really important if abuse is suspected, but if we're standardizing screenings, then it's also an opportunity to have a conversation in an ongoing way. So we want to screen in these situations. We're mainly going to be looking to see what type of violence is occurring. Has the violence escalated? How quickly has it escalated? Are there injuries present? And really, the interventions are going to be more immediate and, safety planning, risk assessment, referrals, and sometimes mandated reports of the injuries in intimate partner violence may occur depending on state laws. Another reason, right, is more to understand our patients better. So we've heard Sarah's story, we've heard other people share some personal experiences in their lives where experiencing intimate partner violence at any point in a person's life can very well have long-term health outcomes for a person. And so screening here would be, really having the opportunity to identify if there's even a history of IPV. And that could really help us to understand better, similar to like the ACEs survey, to know our patients better, and could actually help us to consider treatment and, health care plans that maybe we didn't think about before, not knowing this history. And in these situations, there's always the option to offer supportive services. It's never too late for someone to seek, counseling or be connected to other, support communities. And sometimes people may have done that in the past and need to be reconnected. And then the last piece really is around prevention education. It's an opportunity to really implement some primary prevention. Right? So you're setting a baseline, you're standardizing and normalizing these conversations with all patients. You're helping patients to really reflect on their current relationships and therefore future relationships. And you very well may be the first person that is starting to have these conversations with your patients. Someone earlier said that they thought being 19 might be too early for screening, and absolutely not, right? Because really it's helpful to start to think about not just about violence, but about what is healthy in a relationship. And sometimes when we know better what is healthy, we can identify unhealthy characteristics and red flags easier when we have something to compare it to. Next slide, please.
Sorry, can I just interrupt for one quick second to back on the 17? I used to teach human sexuality at a local university near where I live. And when we would do a whole day on healthy and unhealthy romantic relationships, and they were college kids, so a little bit older, but some of them were between 18 and 20. And it was unbelievable how many of them had already had, really unhealthy experiences, abusive experiences, or were going through things that they didn't know what it meant. Is this is this something that happens in healthy relationships, or is this something that happens in unhealthy? So just, it's just amazing how much is experienced by that.
Absolutely. No, and Yael and I worked together at Planned Parenthood, and we used to do a lot of education around a lot of these different topics in high schools and even in middle schools. And it's also so interesting to think about, like, people have opinions and have formed certain beliefs very, very young. So those conversations are really important to have. So when we start to implement screening, right, we want to have a screening implemented, think about a tool and how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it. And then in order to be prepared, we also have to, have awareness and knowledge about available resources and really connecting patients to other services in the community. This is definitely not something that would only involve, just a healthcare provider. It really is a community. It really is a network of all kinds of support to really help individual people begin and continue their healing process. Next slide, please. So we're going to go into a little bit about screening tools, and I'm going to show you a few examples of some pretty commonly used ones in healthcare settings, specifically like primary care settings. And then just know that, many practices and many systems will kind of take some of these things, and then sometimes will even develop their own screenings tools, or at least add to them and maybe even create a script once it's determined who would even be doing the screenings. Okay, next slide, please. So a few things to note, screening tools, they're identification tools, right? So it's just one part of the process. We don't screen and then do nothing. We need to understand the purpose of the screening. It could be more harmful to someone if we ask questions, have them disclose, and then really not respond to it, right? So we want to be prepared. There are many options for screening tools, and they range in evaluated effectiveness. And a lot of tools have been, tailored or created for specific parts of healthcare. So some are for more emergency settings, some are meant more for primary care. Obviously they're not foolproof. They always require an intervention to follow. And that any screening tools really should be focusing on protecting patient safety, their privacy, and really helping to promote their own autonomy. It will really depend on where the tool is administered and to whom and by whom to determine the best fit. Many tools can be self-administered or by staff. And for screening tools, they should really be carefully considered before making it part of the electronic health record. And that's around safety, right? So if screening tools and responses are going to be part of an electronic health record, then we really want to be considerate, consider how this information will be shared. And it should really be kept in more of the protected types of personal health and patient health information. So, more around like the way that we protect like behavioral health services and the way that we protect other aspects of a person's health. So we don't necessarily want to send over a history of IPV if it's, if patients don't give consent. Next slide, please. And I think the most important thing here is remember that disclosures are not necessarily the primary goal for screening. So if you don't get a disclosure, it doesn't mean that you have failed, right? We're really planting the seed here, and we want to just give every opportunity to our patients to share what's going on with them in a setting that, hopefully they feel safe and secure in. And it's just another opportunity and another place for us to reach our patients and really those who would be most impacted by the violence. Next slide, please. So these are just some commonly used tools. I'm going to give you the abbreviated names, and but they can all be found in a resource that we share at the end as well. So Ironically, there's one called HITS, which is very, very commonly used. It has a pretty good effectiveness rate. And it can be it's a HITS version or extended HITS. And really basically what that stands for is hurt, insulted, threatened, or threaten and scream. So it's a very short assessment tool. And it's basically asking about if a person has been physically hurt, if a person is basically being emotionally hurt by insults, threatening with physical harm, that helps us to assess risk of injury, and then how often a partner screams or curses at the patient. In the extended version, it also asks about forced sexual activity. We know that sexual violence often happens within the context of an intimate relationship, right? And so, you know, it's very widely used. And it's been shown to be pretty effective. And we're also looking at, you know, a specific set period of time. So this isn't asking, have you ever, it's asking about a current partner, or oftentimes it'll say over the last 12 months, right? And that's important because we want to understand like baseline, and we also want to understand if things have escalated in a short period of time. When we see that things are escalating, threats of harm or actual physical injury, and they start to occur more often and escalating, then those would tend to be more red flags for concern for a person's actual physical safety. Okay. Another one is called the partner violence screen. This is 3 tool assessment questions. It's specifically about the last year, and it basically is asking about if a person's experienced any sort of physical violence, if they feel safe in their current relationship, and if there's a partner from a previous relationship that is making them feel unsafe now. So again, they're short questions, they're pretty pointed questions, and the reason why they're really kind of separated out, we're looking for, you know, physical violence. Oftentimes, if physical violence has occurred, we know that it will continue to occur. And so this is ways to kind of check for interventions that would be more around physical safety. I personally feel like, though, that, you know, emotional safety planning is almost just as important. But, you know, a lot of these screening tools aren't really looking at that as much as they are the physical violence part. Next slide, please. So we wanted to kind of hear what you all are doing or thinking about doing, because Yael and I have had a conversation about this ourselves. You know, we're talking about IPV screening right now. And of course, this whole webinar series has been about ACEs and really helping practices start to implement ACE screenings. So, you know, we wanted to hear from all of you, depending on what's going on in your practices. One, you know, do you routinely screen for intimate partner violence? And if you are or plan to incorporate the screening for ACEs, how will you also screen for IPV? So we're really curious to hear, you know, would these be separate screening tools? Would you be trying to combine it? Would it be one that's, you know, self-administered and one that's done by the physician or maybe the physician assistant? So we really wanted to hear from you. And if you're not doing anything yet, that's okay too. There's no judgment. We're honestly, we're just more curious. And hopefully it would be helpful to other attendees, you know, in the webinar that might be in a similar position. So one person said, I am planning on beefing up our prevention groups with this information and offer a pre and post test that works as a screen method for intimate partner violence. Oh, interesting. That's creative. When we initially do an intake with a client, we always ask if they are a victim of domestic violence. Okay.
There's a question about some of the tools in various languages. Do you know?
They vary. Many of them are at least available in Spanish as in addition to English. And I'm not sure what other languages, just so you know. And there's also a visual at the end, but there is a great book that exists. I don't know if you, that has like all of the screening tools in one kind of booklet, and it was put out by the CDC a while back. You can also just get the individual screening tools. I think sometimes they charge like a $20 copyright fee. But you know, if you don't, it's a good resource to have. We are not currently screening, but I do know that the providers at my clinic are interested in implementing a screening tool into their practice. The HITS looks like it would be a great tool to use. Yeah. Okay. So this was more just to kind of start thinking about this, because, you know, screening is really can be very, very useful and helpful to patients. But on the other hand, you know, I know we're talking about time constraints in practices, and also we don't want to overwhelm patients with so many questionnaires or questions, especially about things that are so personal. So it's just something to think about. I'm not sure if we have a strong stance on one or the other. Yeah, but right, or just kind of things to think about as far as you know, what will be most patient-centered as well.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I know we all get caught up in like, how valid is this tool, right? Has it been validated? Has it been this, that, and the other? But I really think in terms of the day-to-day, it's really more about starting the conversation and getting some information about these things, so that it doesn't, I don't know that it, you know, there's not a lot of, there's a lot of right ways to do it, I guess is the point. And using a particular question versus another particular question is not necessarily, you know, something to get super tripped up on. I think the shorter ones will be easier to implement. And then obviously if there's a yes and people want to talk more, then, you know, you explore more with them. And then also for, you know, even when there's a no screen, you know, there's definitely, you know, depending on your specialty or, you know, who you're working with, it's a good way to bring up just romantic relationships in general and how those things are going. And for any of you who are working with younger people, you know, it's a real opportunity to have a little bit of dialogue, to start a dialogue around it.
Thank you, Al. There's some, I can't keep, yeah, I'll ask you if there's something that I'm
asking about trafficking.
Yeah, so there's a question about if there's some trafficking tools. There are actually, and I can, you know, and I'll make a note of it. I can send some resources or some, at least some, you know, sites to start with. The Polaris project is a good place to look.
Write that in.
And also there is an organization called HEAL. I'm flaking on what the rest of it is, but if you Google HEAL, it hopefully will kind of get you started. And then I'll think more about that though, and happy to provide more if you want to send me an email, or I can do it later in the group chat. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, those were just like Yael said, and like I said, that those are just some examples of a screening tool. And really, you know, once you have established what you think might make the most sense in your particular setting with your specific patient population, will help you also determine, you know, what are the best screening tools to use, or if you want to develop something you know, on your own. And then once you have that, how do you screen, right? So a couple of the basics, the 101 of screening, we want to always screen in private. Someone made the excellent point earlier that many times patients are being accompanied by maybe an abusive partner or a member of the family that could also be part of the abuse cycle. So we don't want to take for granted that the person who is there with a patient is necessarily a person that should be in the room. So we always want that time, that privacy with our patients, especially around this screening. With transparency about limitations of confidentiality. So for example, in the state of California, there are sometimes intimate partner violence will be a mandated report for adults, and also sexual assault will be. And so, once you're screening, if you know this, then it's really important to be very transparent and upfront with patients before you have the conversation. And it doesn't have to be in the way that, that's necessarily a bad thing. I like to talk about, I kind of like to differentiate between confidentiality and privacy. So really emphasizing that what is shared will always be private, right? But as far as the confidentiality, you may need to share it with other people of the team or other services that are there to help protect the patient. If you're using a telehealth modality, always make sure that you're aware of the privacy and comfort level before screening or having any sort of, sensitive conversations. I recently saw this article actually where there was a court hearing going on in a domestic violence case, and the judge was astute enough to notice that the background that the accused perpetrator had looked similar to the one of the victim, and they were able to identify that the perpetrator had broken the restraining order rules and was back in the house there. And so it wasn't healthcare, but it was a really good example of, when we're in the screen, we really don't know what else is happening in the rest of the patient's environment. So telehealth, privacy, establishing those privacy boundaries immediately are important. Directly and clearly for screening, and as simple of language as possible. We want to convey compassion and a non-judgmental tone. And face-to-face is really important to have these conversations, even if it's a self-administered screening tool. When you actually do have a conversation about what that tool said, we want to have face-to-face conversations and really doing this in the language that's most comfortable for our patient. We provided some helpful phrases to get you started. So opening with normalizing statements for the screening, such as, because our relationships can influence our overall health, I ask all of my patients about their current relationship experiences and past experiences, right? So it helps us to make sure that the patient doesn't feel like they're being picked on for some reason, or there's something that they're doing wrong necessarily that we're asking them and not other patients, or something like, I'm concerned that some of your symptoms might be a result of someone hurting you. I would like to ask you some more questions about what's going on at home, for example, right? So, we want to be direct, we want to have compassion, and we also just want to kind of set it so that, and let our patients know we're ready to have this conversation. Next slide, please.
Just about 15 minutes.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Okay. So this is a great visual. You're going to have the slides later, so I won't read everything here, but I think the main point here is that, trust is essential. And we've been talking about that since our first webinar, right? So anyone with a trauma history, trust has been broken. Their worldview is altered. Intimate partner violence is trauma. So again, we really need to focus on the trust building, and to, not take it personally if our patients don't trust us to have these conversations right away. And that is really, that is unfortunately part of the response when someone has been hurt in this way. Next slide, please. So when to screen, there's a lot of literature out here, but we, again, it should be all new patients. That's universal screening. It's an opportunity for prevention education, annual visits. If you suspect something's going on, absolutely women of reproductive age, any sort of life transitions, during pregnancy, so first prenatal visit, at least once each trimester, and postpartum checkup. And any other time that you feel like it would be that it's appropriate, but at least the baseline would be these categories. Next slide, please. So we just want to make sure that we don't screen when it's not going to be, feel safe for the patient, basically. So we don't want to screen if we think that there are concerns that the screening the patient at that time may put the patient or the provider at risk. You don't want to screen if you can't do it in the patient's preferred language. We don't want to screen when we're looking down at our notes, or we have the computer screen in front of us, or someone's calling, or another person steps into the examining room. I know that's a lot's happening. We want to make sure we can do it when we can be absolutely present. We want to use open-ended questions, or at least questions that are specific, asking them about their experience and not with leading questions. So I don't know how many times we've heard things like this, and certainly I have heard things like this in my own personal experiences. So you feel safe in your relationship, right? Or you're not depressed right now, right? So it really doesn't leave an option, to be honest. And certainly when you just don't have it in you to be able to be compassionate and non-judgmental, maybe you're having a really hard day yourself for a moment, then be mindful of that. Next slide, please. These are all pretty much the same. I think I covered most of this earlier with the telehealth aspects, but few things. One, if you're providing telehealth visits and thinking about specific to IPV, it's great to start out those appointments in getting your patient's location and having their contact information in case you do get disconnected, or in case there is some sort of reason that you are concerned that immediate help needs to be called. Want to use headphones if you can to ensure the patient confidentiality with your patient. We want to also, again, make sure that the patient has privacy and they're feeling, no one else is in the room if possible. And follow the patient's lead. If you're sensing that something's just not right, or they're not comfortable with the conversation you're having, follow their lead. And maybe switch up the conversation. Next slide, please. So what do we do with a positive screening? Next slide, please. The first thing that we want to do, so this is another great tool. It's from the American Family Physician. It's the SOS doc intervention. It helps you to remember all the things. So the first thing we want to do is validate, right? And we're going to offer support and assess safety. That's the S. So things like, I'm sorry this has happened. And you have a right to be safe, right? This is not your fault. The next one is options. So you want to discuss options. And depending on what has been disclosed, will help to determine what safety planning is going to look like. So safety planning could be anything from, if you're starting to feel upset about what we talked about today, later tonight, who do you have that you can call, right? All the way to something more immediate of, we might need to call 911, or do you want information on how to apply for an order of protection? The next S is for validating strengths. So things to say, you've shown great strength in these very tough circumstances. It took a lot of courage for you to disclose and share what you just shared with me, to really point out that to help the survivor kind of see the strengths that they have and really mirror that for them. And then we want to document. We want to document observations, the assessment, and all the plans, right? So it's really, really important to write what the patient has disclosed to you in their own words. So using quotation marks is helpful. We want to do it word for word. We don't want to paraphrase in that. And then it's helpful to write down some objective observations. So, what did you see? They were crying, they were shaking, there was bruising on, X part of the body. You can take photographs if that makes sense. Although we do know in a lot of intimate partner violence, injuries don't, and bruising doesn't show up right away. And then you want to also document the plans that you discussed. And then the last part is continuity of care, right? So what's going to happen next with this patient? Do you, will you set up a follow-up appointment? Talk about the barriers to accessing the next appointment or help before that patient leaves. Next slide, please. So we already talked a lot about this. What we want to just do is we want to thank a person for sharing the information, and we want to show some empathy and compassion. Right? So there's a lot you can say, and if it's coming from a genuine caring place, it's going to be the right thing to say. Okay. Next slide. And so usually it's pretty clear what not to say. It's okay if you mess up, by the way. Own it, but what we want to avoid doing is we don't want to start to make excuses for the violence or discount its seriousness. We want to be careful not to use statements that kind of show that we're looking for the victim's contribution to the violence. So, well, what did you do to make that person so upset, right? But maybe, so if you want to know what happened, you can say, tell me what was happening before it escalated to that point. We want to avoid victim blaming language, and definitely in our documentation. So please avoid saying things like uncooperative, or non-compliant or hysterical or things like that. It can really work against the survivor if their medical records are ever subpoenaed. And then also just be mindful that not every survivor's end goal is to stop the relationship. And even if we think or want that person to not be in the relationship anymore, it's not up to us. And so all of your discussions really need to follow the survivor's lead. And safety planning may mean, what can you do to keep yourself safe when you're still in the relationship with that person, right? Next slide, please. And safety planning really, again, try not to get so caught up in a checklist. There's a lot of templates out there, but there's no safety plan template that will be perfectly tailored to every one of your patients. So safety planning really should just be a discussion. It should be much more short-term. You're not asking the person what their 5-year plan is. You're talking to them about the next, when they leave the office and maybe between now and the next time that you check in with them. It should be creative. It should build on the strengths and what the survivor is already doing to keep their self safe. It should, keep in mind that even though this is the first time you may be learning about what's happening for that survivor, they've been living in it. And most survivors are very resourceful and know what are the things that can help them stay safer and the things that are going to be triggering, right? Next slide, please. So, again, we want to focus on things like safety. And when I say safety, it's physical safety and also emotional safety, right? So where are there any places or any people that that help to bring you peace and quiet sometimes? Who are those people? Where are those places? What are the things, if anything, that bring you joy? So it doesn't have to all just be about physical danger, but more about overall person's quality of life. And we want to also kind of brainstorm with people kind of anticipating in cases where situations may become more dangerous. So if you decide that you may be breaking up with that person tonight, what's the plan going to be, right? And also, safety planning means telling the person about all of the other resources available to them. And again, these are some links to some templates that could be helpful, but safety planning doesn't have to actually be a big paper thing. It really is going to be about what the unique needs are of each patient. Next slide, please. What we want to focus on, though, as far as high-risk indicators are really what we talked about before. If there's any indication that a person has been strangled, so if a patient ever says that, yes, they put their hands on my neck, that's a red flag. If a person is being stalked, that's a red flag. When we know the abuse is escalating over a short period of time, when there have been threats to actual kill, someone has actually said that. If we know that a person has access to guns and other weapons, like Yael shared earlier. And high-risk situations are usually when there's a recent separation from the abuser, and we know that why that is, right? These are the things that we want to convey to our patient. We're really concerned for your safety, what you're sharing with me right now. It's a hard conversation to have, but it's an important thing to say. Next slide, please. And these just talk about all the different things to include, right? What a person may want to plan to take with them, some of the categories to think about, and always just, again, following the survivor's lead. And if a person has children and or pets, they need to be part of that consideration as well. Next slide, please. So this is usually where everyone gets tripped up, the confidentiality part, and when do we have to disclose this to other people? So pretty much standard right across the country is the limitations to confidentiality for healthcare providers is when a person expresses intent to harm themselves or someone else, right? That's not a surprise. And limitations to confidentiality may be if it's been disclosed that children have been involved and have been witnessing the violence or they're in the home. And so that may be something that we're going to have to report and share with maybe children's services. In California, we're going to get to that in a minute, also any sort of physical injury by an intimate partner, if there's physical injury, that is actually a report that has to be made as well, and also sexual violence, even for adults. I have very mixed feelings about that here in New York State. That's not the case at all. And you could definitely see the pros and cons to this, right? But knowing that, you just have to really consider that, that disclosing information is always going to be tough for the patient. And so really being clear about it, being direct about it, and doing it with your patient is really important. So if you need to make a report or make a call, it's talking to the patient about how is this going to, how can you do it so that it has, that's the least scary or the least upsetting for your patient. And also talk about the realities of some of the things that could be dangerous about reporting. Next slide, please. So this is really talks
We have
more,
to wrap up.
okay, this talks more specifically about the California laws. Again, this is about this is about the provider theirself, and this is about physical or sexual injury. And this does not apply if you're a social worker on here right now and you're in California. A social worker actually does not have to. It's a medical provider that's treating injuries. So it's a little bit interesting. And I guess the legislators that wrote this really, we're making the connection. If there are injury, then that's a sign that there's going to be escalation of worse injury, right? And that's what they're thinking. And the report for intimate partner violence is going directly to the local law enforcement. So it's basically making a report to the police. Next slide, please. So what else can we do? You know, this is an evolving conversation, and it's just as important to talk about healthy relationships with our patients as it is unhealthy. You know, because we know that the relationships in all of our lives either help our health or they, you know, they harm our health, right? Relationships are very, very important and integral part of all of our lives. Always believe the patient. You know, the nice thing is that you're not in healthcare. We're not, you know, investigators. We don't have to, you know, have proof that a crime was committed to support a patient's disclosure. The other important thing is to definitely link up with your local direct victim service programs, your sexual assault and your domestic violence programs that are in your community. They can be a huge help to you, and advocates can be super helpful as far as you know, just kind of safety planning, getting a person into counseling maybe, but also helping to navigate the criminal justice, the police, all of that stuff too. Most programs that are similar to the one I work at, that's what we're trained in. And you know, if you can, there's a lot of literature and posters out there that you can put up around your office that really just lets all your patients know that you're a center and you are staff that are ready and want to have these conversations with your patients. Next slide. And these are some of the suggested resources. There's a great report that was just released for California, the roadmap for ending domestic violence. The one all the way on the right, the IPV and sexual violence assessment instruments. That's the booklet I was talking about that could be helpful. The one in the middle is just one sample from Futures Without Violence that they have these safety cards and you can print them out, and they're a great way to get discussions started around relationships. The other thing that I wanted to share is that there's something called, I'm writing it into the chat. It's called My Plan. Oh, sorry. And it is it's a free app, and it was built to be used with healthcare providers. And it's an app that you can actually, if it's safe for patients to download, it helps a person to determine the type of safety plan that they need to create for themselves. And there's some really great tools and some literature there that could be helpful to you all as providers. So I actually didn't even know about it until recently. And and when I went to it, I was like, this is amazing. How did we not know this? So and that's it. Thanks. Next slide, please.
Okay, we're coming to the end. Just, I know I keep asking if there's any practices out there that are screening for ACEs. We would love to talk to you. So please email me. We'll pay you for an hour and a half of your time. We want to know how it's going and you know, what other kind of support you need. Kimmy, if you want to go to the last slide. So we have a few minutes to stay on if there's any additional questions. I know we've been responding, you know, to the chat as we can. And you guys have been a very chatty group, which is fabulous. We're so happy. So we'll stay on a little bit if anyone wants to stay on. I notice people are dropping off, so we totally get it. Thank you all so much. You have been such a great audience.
Thank you, everyone.
And we'll still hang out for a few.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I have the one about laws by state too.
There's a bunch of very inspiring people, our participants.
I know. Oh, I know you all are so kind.
Just as a reminder for those who are still on, you will get the recording, the slides, all of it, either tomorrow or by Monday. Just look out for an email from Kimberly Mirabella. It'll come from her.
I'm reading, I'm catching up on some of the conversations. How awesome. And the link to the slides go out in an email from Kimmy, right, to all of the participants?
Mm-hmm. All right, well, if there's nothing further, I guess, you know, we'll say goodbye. And again, thank you all so much. Look out for everything. Feel free to get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. And if there's anything else we can get you or help you with, we are more than happy to. So thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Bye, everyone.